Oh, look, there's a big green thing popped up.
Yes, we are live. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll just give it a few more minutes for everybody else to join, and we will begin today's webinar. Hello, and thank you for joining us all today. I'm Maria Amato. I'm the General Manager of AIR, the Australian Independent Record Labels Association. AIR was started some 23 years ago by a bunch of practitioners who worked in the independent sector who thought that a voice was needed for people who wanted to do things on their own terms. Over the years, AIR has lobbied government to advocate for copyright protection, to ensure that royalties are paid. We've lobbied MTV and Foxtel because prior to that, they were broadcasting content and not paying people. So we've paid out over $1.5 million to our members over the 8-year journey of having those agreements in place. We hold an annual AIR Awards and IndieCon Australia conference to shine the spotlight and celebrate and promote the success of independent artists and labels who have just embarked upon the courageous journey to release their own music, look after their own passion projects and create a financial future for themselves. This year's AIR Awards will be held on the 1st of October and IndieCon will be held on the 1st and 2nd of October. And as COVID has put a little bit of a spanner on all of our lives and asked us to find alternate ways around the mountain, if we can't bring you the AIR Awards and IndieCon as a live event face-to-face, we will find digital ways of making it happen for you. But we're hoping that the borders will open and business will be back to normal, and we look forward to seeing you. If you're an AIR member, you get complimentary tickets to the AIR Awards and IndieCon, but we do sell tickets to IndieCon if you are not a member. We produce weekly charts and a weekly newsletter, and if you're not an AIR member, please subscribe on our website, air.org.au, and you will receive a newsletter each week which has news, our charts, new artist releases, and offers from industry friends who give exclusive benefits for AIR members and other opportunities for you thinking about starting your journey in the indie sector. We work closely with PPCA, and today I have Lynn Small from PPCA who's going to talk a little bit about what PPCA does. And then we're going to open up our panel discussion with our wonderful guests. And if any of you during the course of this short lunchtime webinar have any questions, we invite you to look at the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and write your questions that you may have there. And if we can't address your specific questions during this lunchtime panel, we will respond post-event. This is being recorded and we will be putting this webinar on our website after the event for you to have a look at. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Lynn Small from PPCA, who will talk to you a little bit about the great work that they do. Lynn.
Thanks, Maria. And brilliantly, I have remembered to unmute. I'm getting much better at this Zoom stuff, I hope. It's great to be able to connect with everyone, even though we're all so remote at the moment and working so distantly. Haven't seen any of my colleagues for a couple of months, so it's, it's great to be able to see people this way and still connect. My name is Lynn Small. I'm the General Manager of PPCA, and I've held that role for around 15 years now and been with PPCA for around 22 years. But don't tell anyone, I don't know how that happened. PPCA is a copyright collecting society. In my experience, most people I talk to are very familiar with APRA. Everyone seems to know APRA. It's been around a lot longer than us. I like to say we're the other one. We are looking after people's sound recording rights and doing many of the things that APRA does in terms of licensing and distributing license fees. The difference is we are looking after the sound recording copyrights. We're managed by a board of 8 with 3 shareholder directors, 2 licensor representative directors, 2 artist representative directors, and a representative from the artist manager community. Both the licensor directors and the artist representatives are determined by election. We have elections each year, and each of them serves a 2-year staggered term. So we always have some representatives there that have some experience from a previous year. I think the most important thing to remember when thinking about PPCA is the fact that there are 2 separate copyrights in any sound recording. There's the underlying copyright that relates to the musical work. The song, the melody, the lyrics are represented by APRA, who look after that for both the songwriters, the composers, and the music publishers. But quite separately, there is a copyright in each sound recording that is produced of all of those works. And it is those sound recording copyrights that PPCA is representing for the industry. The critical thing about that, I suppose, is for everyone to always remember that there are 2 separate income streams that are involved. And particularly when people are starting out, you know, trying to build sustainable careers, make sure that you are not leaving any revenue on the table and that you are accessing every possible revenue stream that you can. We currently represent around 3,000 licensors who control over 60,000 record labels and about 4,500 registered artists. When I talk about licensors, for PPCA, that means people who, for the Territory of Australia, control rights in sound recordings and music videos and have signed our standard input agreement that allows us to include that repertoire in our blanket license, so that we can build a blanket license that covers the repertoire of all of those licensors, currently the 3,000, that is a product that is really valuable to broadcasters, people who are publicly performing, for example, cafes, not so much now, cafes, restaurants, nightclubs, sad story about those at the moment, but any public place where you're hearing music performed should have an APRA license and probably a PPCA license as well. In order to become a PPCA licensor, you need to complete our standard input agreement. Anyone who hasn't already done that, I really recommend that you look at our website, www.ppca.com.au. There is a section on the menu titled Labels. If you go there, you'll get instructions on how you can register with us. And I urge everyone to do it before the 31st of August if you haven't already, because that is the deadline for our current distribution year. And we prefer that everyone who should be is included in that distribution. Artists can also register with PPCA under what we call our Direct Artist Distribution Scheme. This is a scheme that allows us to pay featured Australian artists 50% of the earnings on each of those recordings as they come through PPCA, but it is only available to artists who register, and that's because this is an ex gratia scheme and it isn't related to any copyright ownership. You may have signed a record deal, you may be represented by a label, but even so, and despite perhaps having had advances from that label, you can still register with PPCA to be paid directly. And once again, I'd urge all recording artists to do that if they have recordings released and to do it before the 31st of August. It's a relatively simple process. For artists, there are 3 forms to complete. They're all available on our website, back at www.ppca.com.au in our artist menu section. There is a form to simply tell us about yourself and give us your basic details, a form to tell us about your tax status, and then some paperwork to advise us initially and on an ongoing basis about all of your releases. We urge everyone to keep us up to date on the repertoire that they release, because that's what helps us to pay you accurately and to the full extent that you can be paid. Lots of people ask us about the difference between APRA and PPCA. And the first and most fundamental one is the rights that we represent, which I covered at the beginning. APRA looking after the musical work, PPCA looking after sound recordings and music video clips. But there are some other differences. APRA, for example, takes an assignment of rights, which makes APRA, for the rights it gains, a monopoly in the territory. PPCA, on the other hand, takes what we call a non-exclusive license, which means that even though you grant us rights to allow us to sell our blanket licenses, you still retain those rights yourself and are able to license in parallel and sometimes in competition with PPCA. So it doesn't restrict your right to license if you want to do that. For the most part, though, we find that people aren't necessarily equipped to be issuing licenses to all of the hairdressers or doctor surgeries or cafes in Australia. And that is generally work that people are quite happy to have societies like PPCA and APRA look after for them. It makes it much more efficient for not only artists and record labels, but it makes it much more efficient for those users. It would be a nightmare for cafe owners to have to go and try and negotiate a license with each person who owns a recording they want to play. I think the bottom line is it simply wouldn't happen. How do we distribute the money? PPCA currently does a single annual distribution, which takes place in December, and that covers our net surplus for the year ending the previous June. So we're approaching our year end as we come up to the 30th of June. We will finalise our accounts, we'll have those audited, and then in December, usually a week or so before Christmas, we will make a payment of that entire distribution pool. PPCA holds no money over from year to year. The only money that is held back in December is if there has been money allocated to tracks that are in dispute between copyright owners. And that money is only held for as long as it takes to get that dispute resolved. And that's one of the reasons I will reiterate again, register by the 31st of August, because you've got to be in it by then to participate in the annual distribution. For Australian recordings, local repertoire, we pay 50% to the controlling record label, and the other 50% is available to be shared between the registered artists. Of course, if artists don't register, one or more of the artists that are involved or eligible, the money that would otherwise have been payable to them will be paid to their record label and will then be treated in line with the recording contracts that are relevant to that particular recording, which is once again why we recommend registering. If you want the payment directly from PPCA, you must be registered with us to get it. Otherwise, it will go back to you through your record label. That was about local repertoire. For international repertoire, if that's of interest to any labels who represent foreign repertoire here, 100% is paid through to the controlling label for the Australian territory, and then those labels are obligated to deal with that income in regard to all of the contracts they have under their own licensing arrangements. PPCA, apart from its licensing activities, supports a number of different initiatives. We contribute to the ATSI office, which is run out of APRA, also to Sounds Australia, to Support Act. For a number of years, we've supported the Breakthrough Artist Awards at both the AIR and ARIA Awards. We support the Australian Copyright Council and the Arts Law Centre of Australia. And perhaps most relevantly, we have 5 recording grants available each year, which we provide in partnership with the Australia Council. So we put up the $75,000 and the Australia Council handles all of the administration of that for us, because they have some wonderful systems for that. They do it all the time. And that funds in 5 separate $15,000 recording grants each year. The grants for this year will be announced, I think, within the next 2 weeks. The peer advisory panel reviewed those recently, so there'll be some interesting announcements coming out shortly. I suppose just one last thing before I hand back to Maria. I'm also involved in Support Act, and PPCA has been involved with Support Act since its inception. I just want to remind everyone that if you're not aware of it, or if you know of anyone in your network who's not aware of it, please introduce them to Support Act. It is here for the industry. It is the benevolent fund or charity that looks after music industry workers in crisis, from crew to composers to musicians to any sort of music worker. And Support Act also runs a wellbeing helpline that operates 24/7, 365 days a year. Support Act was also recently lucky enough to get a substantial grant from the federal government to allow Support Act to help music industry workers during this period of COVID when people's work has dried up. And there's information on the SAL website about how that can be accessed. So I'd urge everyone to take a look. Even if you don't need it, there's probably someone in your network who does, and Support Act would certainly be ready, willing and able to assist. So thanks, Maria. I'll hand back to you now until we get some questions.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Righto, everyone, I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful panel today. I'm going to go to you first, Mark. Would you like to tell everyone a little bit about you and your label?
Skinnyfish Music is based in Darwin. We've been operating for 21 years this last April. We started out working in tea, and in the last few years we've created an imprint label called Settle Down Records, where it takes a broader view. As an example, Caiti Baker, who's on this Zoom meeting, this webinar, is sitting right in front of me. She's probably the premier artist on Settle Down Records. So here's, and the one feature in which I think Phil will agree that the NT and WA are used to the tyranny of distance to the marketplace. So COVID's only just a small bump in the road.
That's great.
That's about it.
Thank you. Caiti, want to tell us a little bit about your journey? How long have you been pursuing your dreams as an indie artist?
Hello, everyone. In my early 20s, my longtime collaborator, James Monaghan, and I started a band called Sieta, which we were signed to indie label Elephant Tracks on the East Coast there for about 6 or 7 years. And then lots of personal things occurred, and I had a lot of mental health issues that I then cleaned up and was able to, I guess, take accountability for my own name. And instead of going out as the moniker Sieta, I came out as Caiti Baker. It was around the same time that I began collaborating again with Michael Honan, who is Mark Grose's partner at Skinnyfish here, and James, who is from the NT originally, and I spent a lot of time in the NT as a kid. We decided to relocate back home to the NT, and I came out as Caiti Baker, I guess, in 2015, supporting Dr. G. Yunupingu. And it's been a pleasure since.
And we love your work. So thank you so much for joining us today. Marcus, would you like to share a little bit about your journey as both a label owner and a lawyer?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Yeah, day to day, I'm a lawyer at Media Arts Lawyers, and we work with a load of independent and majorly signed artists and independent labels. Lots of artists, Stella being one, and then others such as Tame Impala, Teskey Brothers, Flume, Courtney Barnett, Chet Baker, a whole load. And I set up a independent label in around 2015 as a means to release the music of an act I was managing, which I think a lot of managers / labels have spawned that way. And I've since had a few releases since then, just for developing acts and looking to help them on their initial pathway into releasing music.
Fabulous. Phil Stevens, can I ask you to talk to us all?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I started probably 25 to 30 years ago in the music business. I started as a party organizer, concert organizer, then as a bar owner for a place called Mojo's in Fremantle, and subsequently then met John Butler playing at the venue, and started managing him about 6 months later, and then joined up with the Waifs as their manager. And currently we're managing Stella Donnelly, who's on this panel. It's fantastic. My daughter's band, who I'm a little bit of Papa Proud, San Cisco. So the Waifs and John. So managing 4 bands, no more bars, and no more promoting other than on behalf of my artists.
Wonderful, and what great artists they are, and how lucky are we to have Stella joining us today. Stella, share a bit about your amazing story.
Hi there. I guess I played around WA and Perth for about 8 or 9 years in various different acts and outfits, and playing my own music. And I hadn't really even heard of, you know, touring or anything like that. It was just something I really loved doing at home. And then Scarlett, Phil's daughter, told him to go and watch me play a gig down at Mojo's, and then I got offered the support for a San Cisco Australian tour, and then yeah, Phil became my manager, and it was a really great time. I'd put out an EP on cassette tape prior to meeting Phil, and I'd put it on Triple J Unearthed, and one of the songs got some nice feedback and everything, so I was getting a little bit of play there, and I really didn't really know what was going on. I'd never heard of a publisher, I'd never heard of a publicist. I guess the facilities in Perth are a bit different to what they are on the East Coast. So it was a whole new territory for me. So I'm very grateful to have had Phil kind of guide me through it as an independent artist. And now I'm signed overseas with a label called Secretly Canadian, and they cover me all over the world, excluding Australia. So I'm able to kind of do my own thing over here with their help as well. So it's been a great time.
Fantastic, and we love your work too. And last but definitely not least, Arlo, would you like to jump in and share a little bit about you and Zelon and Noisehive?
Absolutely. So my name's Arlo. I work for a Melbourne-based digital distributor called Zelon Entertainment. We've been around about 12 years, of which I've worked 10. Just recently, we started our Zelon itself has worked largely with the dance labels in Australia, so lots of the club music, house and electronic music has come through us. And just recently, we've at the end of last year, we've launched a platform called Noisehive, which is our independent artist distribution platform. So it's a commission-based service that independent artists can sign up, start their own label, and we'll help them sort of get established, get the music out to all the different platforms. We can collect royalties from overseas. We can sort of pitch them for profile with the different stores, and being that we're a commission service rather than a flat fee, if the artist makes money, we make money. So that's kind of our attitude towards that. I also manage a Melbourne act called Kids at Midnight, who makes kind of like 80s inspired teen film romance anthems, and I write and produce electronic music myself under the moniker Watermelon Boy.
Fabulous. Well, it's all about the music, and it's great to know that we've got a distributor on today as well. But I'm going to go to our 2 artists and ask them how they connect with their fans. Stella, do you want to share how you connect with yours on digital, social media, etc.?
Firstly, hi Caiti, love your work. I've always kind of kept my Instagram very personalized, and been very, and haven't kind of, I've always actually hated posting about gigs on it. Actually, I find that I much prefer being a lot more just me or whatever, just posting about bird watching or whatever dumb thing I'm doing at the time. But I found that, you know, Instagram was my primary way of connecting to people who like my music, and then I kind of, I was covering it all. I was doing the Twitter and Facebook and everything like that. But then eventually I found it all a little bit a little bit consuming if I was to do it all at once. And I think I got trolled maybe one too many times on Facebook. So I handed the reins over to Phil and Tiffany, who works with Phil, and they kind of just kept my Facebook artist page as a just, you know, posting what needs to be posted and stuff, and then I kept it connected to my Instagram. And I mean, that's been the best way for me to be able to connect to people and showcase what I'm doing. And during this time, I took part in the Isolate concert in the first week, so it was all very beautiful, kind of coming together. I think I heard from Rhiannon, who was running it, like 3 days before it happened, and it was none of us really knew it was going to happen again, and then it's become what it has become now. So yeah, I mean, during this time it's been kind of a combination between taking some time off for myself after three years of pretty hectic touring, but also trying to kind of let people know that I'm still around. It's a weird, I don't know if Caiti struggles with this, but I've been struggling a little bit to take time for myself, but also stay connected.
Fabulous. And have you been creating new work during this time? Anything inspiring you to write new material?
Not really.
Maybe after today that'll change.
Maybe after today. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be like, I've got a symphony organized, you know, it's all done, it's all written, ready to go. No, I've been learning the drums, and that's about it. So who knows, it might just be a drum solo coming out next year. We'll see.
Fantastic. And Caiti, what about you? What mediums do you engage with?
Oh, I'm not sure if I come from a bit of an older generation. I was late to Facebook. I was late to Instagram. Sometimes I forget that I have it. I need to be way better at it. I would like to say that every day I get better at it. Similar thing to Stella, but maybe opposite. I think I probably post just about my music and not about the personal stuff, which I am realizing that is very key to fans wanting to know your journey and be personal. So something that I struggle with personally, it's something that I will have to, you know, I know there's a lot of artists out there that feel the same. I'm quite private in a lot of ways, and don't feel comfortable with a lot of my stuff on the internet, but that's about a changing world, I guess. Everything has gone pretty much fully online. I did the Isolate Festival a couple of weeks after Stella, I think, and I had an amazing time. I thought it was a really great platform, and can see that there is definitely you know, a future for this live streaming thing. And I have my second or third one coming up this Saturday with the Lounge Room sessions run by the Riverboats Festival, which I'm grateful to be a part of. I'm trying to engage and be more present with my fans online. Like Stella says, it can be quite consuming to be on all of the platforms. And I think just listening to other artists and other people and seeing what works for them, but also being authentically yourself. And authentically, personally, is not being on the internet very much. So I need to work out a little balance. But I spend a lot of time making music and working with the other artists that are on the label here in Darwin as well. So sometimes I might just be a little bit too busy for it, I guess. Yeah.
Not a worry. That's great. And you have to be authentically you. So you do whatever you feel comfortable with. But I'm sure your fans will be keen as mustard to find out when your new work is coming. So that's probably a great time. Now to the label gents on with us today. What do you, and as well as Stella and you, Caiti, release timelines. People often ask us, you know, what sort of timeline should be put in place before you're looking to release new work? What in your experiences, and any of you jump in, is a good suggestion?
I'll jump in.
Great, thanks, Phil.
I think things have changed. We're experiencing quite a change in what was once considered the norm to now. It's a time where I think the DSP providers like Spotify and Apple Music have kind of changed the way we release music as a record label, and as an artist needs to release a record. So in the old days of 2 or 3 years ago, I think the album was created to then be able to promote touring and to, or the album was created so you could have a series of releases after the album. You have a series of singles after the album. So you might have one single first, release the album, and then release another 2 to 3 singles. That's changed quite dramatically now because the impact of the DSPs, Spotify and Apple, etc., are kind of demanding that that we put out music before the album comes out. And the album, for a lot of people now, is almost like the end game. It's you know, the album's almost like a celebration of all the music that you've been putting out in the last year, putting it all together and going to the fans and saying, well, finally you have the album. You might have heard half of it already, but it'll be a beautiful vinyl packaging. There'll still probably be a few CDs knocking around, and you can put it all together on your Spotify playlist. But Spotify and your Apples will pretty much stop working to help you promote that music at that point. So for San Cisco, we started this. They've got an album coming out in September. We started the process by saying, okay, we're going to do 4 singles, 12 weeks apart in the lead up to the album coming out. That was before we signed a record deal with Network Records overseas, and they came to us and said, we want you to do 3 singles, then an EP, then another single, then another EP, then another single, and then eventually put it all together and you've got an album. And we're kind of like going, we're not ready. That is way too much. And our long established 10-year fan base of people that have been used to like solid singles and albums, would be rather confused and frustrated. So we came to a middle ground where we agreed to do 2 singles, an EP, and then another 2 singles, and then an album. So it's a little bit, it's a good example of like give and take between your Australian independent label and your international partners, kind of finding a middle ground that kind of tries to create something that works for everybody. So I think we're into another 2 singles before the album comes out for San Cisco.
Fantastic. Mark, what about you? When you've been releasing new work for artists, what's a good timeline? 6 weeks prior, 10 weeks prior? When do you start putting things out there?
We're in the process of trying to work out what the system really wants at the moment. We, at the beginning of the year, started thinking that we were just going to release singles from each of the artists, with not necessarily an album in the foreseeable future. But as Phil said, there's a desire for an end product. So we've switched back to 2, maybe 3 singles, and finish with an album. So what I say to the creative team here is, I need your package 10 weeks before we even think about a release date, because there's multiple systems, your PR system, your distributors, publishers. So in terms of a first single and followed by a second single, the timing of that generally floats a little bit depending on the uptake of the first single. But certainly we've a couple of singles and an album.
Terrific. We've had a live question ask us, you know, the strategy around there's a high cost in producing vinyl and CDs, and at what point should an artist consider doing that? Well, if you're a new artist, would you all agree that perhaps they need to get a bit of a following? So maybe they should release something digitally first, and then once they've got the following, perhaps look at getting their fans to do pre-orders or so forth to reduce cost and wastage and all of those things. What would your strategy be on when is a good time to put something into physical hands, whether it be vinyl or CD?
Yeah, I think...
No, sorry. Please.
Mark?
Yeah.
I think you have to have a fan base, regardless of what you're trying to do. It's no point in producing. In the old days, you know, a lot of artists had 1,000 CDs under their bed. So in this digital age, you can get your music out and you can build a fan base. Build the fan base so that you prime the pump for any merch, any vinyl, any physical products. So build your fan base first.
Good call. Stella and Caiti, when your labels are putting a strategy together about release plans, is there anything that you two do in the lead up to? Do you think about performing, touring, getting some words out through your social media channels? Caiti?
Oh, wow. I'm a graphic designer by trade, so I do a lot of my graphics here. So we have a pretty cool community and family of creatives that we all bounce each other's ideas off of. So coming up with merch ideas or limited edition ideas, currently I think personally merch is like an experience. It's the take home. Like I don't think I'll press CDs anymore. I don't think there's necessarily a need for that. But vinyl, we're obviously seeing a resurgence in vinyl and collectability and that kind of thing, in cassettes as well, depending on the kind of music that you're making. So I kind of like to think about little interesting things that play off my personality or play off my brand, I guess, that is special and unique to me that I think my fans would be interested in. And I'm currently exactly doing this right now for my upcoming release for Mary of the North, my next album. So I'm actually really interested to hear what everyone thinks is a good idea as well. I think just a lot of creative brainstorming around ideas that are, again, authentic to yourself and your brand and your music.
Fantastic. Does anyone else have anything to add to what Caiti's just said?
I think both people just touched on that earlier by sort of sneakily referring to records as merch. I think it's really important to think of it in that way. It's not your music anymore. Your music is something that exists in the ether and in the cloud, and records, physical copies are merchandise. So the idea of it as being some kind of promotional tool that you would somehow gain fans by printing a run of vinyl, probably not as sound as thinking of it as, if I could sell 500 t-shirts, then maybe I can also sell 500 records, and needing to have an established fan base for that.
Good suggestion. Phil, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, it might not be the most appropriate time, but just in terms of merchandise, I think San Francisco have recently just had a really successful kind of a launch of a active sportswear line. So they've been busy with music and lots of releases coming up leading up to their album, but running parallel with that, and something that's quite close to their heart, they're a fairly fashionable kind of band and have a good presence on social media with a fashion sense. So they came up with, rather than just band merch, they came up with like a fashion line, like an active wear line. And they borrowed inspiration from lots of places from around the world. And it's been absolutely a huge success, and it's been a very big kind of like a financial helper in this period of COVID and no touring. So they've managed to, they probably managed to substitute 3 concerts with a merchandise release. So, and that's kind of promoted that idea that people want to buy into a brand, not just into the music. So I think encouraging people to, encouraging artists to kind of to think about that as well as about the creation of music is a really important thing.
Terrific. And last question on distributing and getting your music out there. Arlo, can I ask you, given you are a distributor, best plans to get your music on Spotify and connect globally, get your music heard globally? No one can tour for the moment, so we need to think of export. How do we reach our overseas audience?
Yeah, certainly. I think that the music industry has a long history of trying to shortcut real growth. And it doesn't matter whether it was trying to get your songs on radio or trying to get on Spotify playlists or trying to find these kind of breakout moments that will give your artist the opportunity to be exposed to thousands and thousands of new fans. I think the problem with that is that often you might make it onto a huge playlist, but then if it's just on in the background, your stream numbers will go up like a sugar spike, and then they'll just drop off when the song comes off the playlist. So I think it's really, really important for artists to focus on their follower growth across all platforms, and that your metrics shouldn't be about trying to chase that golden goose, but to try to establish a fan base that will serve you for your entire career, and that you'll be able to serve music to, and you'll be able to engage with in the long term, rather than just trying to have huge numbers at any one point in time. I think also with the fact that we've changed from people buying a whole lifetime license up front to people paying off your music over time, as they do when they listen to it in streaming, that it's really important to have that long tail focus and to just try to grow your audience rather than looking for any kind of way to shortcut it.
Terrific. Marcus, can I ask you what some of your artists and clients do to connect and distribute digitally and or overseas?
Sorry. I think across the board, it's having a good partner where you can. I mean, these days, getting your music available on those platforms has never been easier in many ways. There's obviously your TuneCore, CD Babies, the aggregators who can get things straight onto those platforms. It's then partnering with someone like a Noisehive or the other distributors, the Orchard or Believe or a bunch more, if you're not going down the label route, if you are remaining independent, and having someone front-facing there who's also helping with the promotion of that music to those DSPs, in addition to yourself. I mean, it's a pretty tricky time to be an artist, because it's not only you're looking at releasing the music and creating the music, it's all about the content in and around that. So artists have to be constantly creating not only music, but constantly creating content that goes with that helps this release timeline go on. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just a matter of being present and working on that fan base, as Arlo says, and really trying to organically grow that as best as you can.
Terrific. And now, all as label owners and as artists, the world of contracts and how important they are to ensuring, A, you get paid, that the best terms are negotiated on your behalf. Who better to ask than you, Marcus? Want to lead that conversation? Tips?
Well, it depends. I mean, anytime, we always say to any of our acts that anytime they're coming through, as soon as there's something presented to you in any form, written, if it's 1 page or 100 pages, it should have someone look over it, because you don't want to be agreeing to things. It's just more about understanding what you are agreeing to, and ensuring that you've got knowledge of what that means to you. I mean, some artists might enter into deals and not be aware that there's certain requirements about what qualifies as a release, for instance, and whether that satisfies the commitment for that period. And we've seen acts get stuck by that when they weren't quite sure. So it's more about understanding what you're doing, and also I think with the collaborative element so much these days, a lot about artists internally, if they're working with other artists and working with producers and what have you, having that clarity of understanding between them when they walk away from a session or when they walk away from a co-writing sort of time, just ensuring that things are documented. It doesn't have to be a formal written agreement, but just having an agreement, ideally, well, you start verbally most likely, and then develop that into something that is written, and that can be an email exchange, that can be something that is valid. Just having things in place for independent artists particularly, to ensure that there's those sort of terms locked in between them and their collaborators.
Fabulous. And for any singer-songwriters out there that are thinking of either signing to an indie label or perhaps even self-releasing and starting their own label, I, as with my accounting background, would strongly recommend our AC, a lawyer and an accountant from the outset to get their business structure set up properly. You may think that that's expensive, but it's a lot more expensive later down the track if your accounts are a mess or you've got yourself into a pickle because you haven't had agreements put in place and the right structure put in for you. Mark and Phil, can I ask you to share your thoughts on my comment just then?
I agree with you 100%, Maria. The thing about the English language is, and the use of lawyers are there to interpret the meaning of a word, and a word can mean so many different things. So as an artist who wants to sign to anything, get a lawyer who can interpret what you're signing. Otherwise, you're just throwing yourselves to the wolves.
Totally. And Phil?
I was going to say, and let's not forget, I think lawyers these days for emerging artists can play a really important role of introducing you to other labels and introducing other opportunities, especially overseas. Company that Marcus works for has almost acted as A&R company for our acts, and made really important introductions for Stella, for Francisco, for John Butler. So they're there for kind of multiple reasons, but they're very, very often the first people I'd like to pick up a phone to and ask for their advice. They're quite human. Yeah, surprisingly, they're very human, and they do make a lot of sense when they talk to you in person.
Terrific. Being an accountant, I know that, you may only have a relationship with your accountant once a year, but there's lots of software out there. So as an artist, when you're starting off, or as a label when you're starting off, you can look after your own books. It's quite easy these days. It's not like it was, say, 20, 30 years ago when you actually needed to have a bookkeeper come in or engage one. So I strongly advise that you keep all those records up to date, and nowadays you can scan your receipts and enter them into your software, so you don't need shoe boxes of stuff that your accountants need to wade through at the end of the year. That just brings us to almost at the end of our lunch hour, but I've got to ask each of you, what do you love about being indie? Phil, while you're on the screen staring at me, what is it that made you stay indie, stay true?
I think it's there's a lot of freedom that comes with being independent. You're not, you don't have to, you can set your own agenda for what you think is the best interest of your artist, and you can fight the good fight with your distributors and with your overseas partners. And there's just a little bit less clutter. You are the kind of conductor, bringing your independent people together as a team. So you are responsible for building a team. So you have the ability to have the people that you want representing your artist the way that they want to be represented. Rather than if you sign to a label, you really lose control of who's working for you and for your artists. That doesn't mean that there aren't amazing labels out there that do incredible jobs and totally believe, they want to provide what their artist wants. But it certainly does give you some extra freedom. And I think also at the end of the day, we'd have to say with the success of the artists that we've had, they've been probably in a financially much better position, reaping the rewards of a larger percentage of their income and not losing it to the label.
Fabulous. Caiti, I'd love to ask you, you're combining lots of talents here, your singing ability and your artistic ability, given that you are a graphic artist. Why do you love being independent?
I love being independent because it's my family, it's my community. Darwin's a small place, and we're all involved in everything that each other does. Last night I was tracking Serena Peck's vocals for a song that Koya James, who works on my stuff as well. So we're all very interlaced with everything that we do, and we all support and love each other doing what we want to do. It's not the expectations of, if someone wants to be super famous, then that's a whole other ball game to like the end game for what we want to do this for the rest of our lives. It's, like Arlo mentioned, it's about creating that longevity and that growth in a fan base rather than that kind of like celebrity enticement and just wanting to be big or whatever. And all of that's changed now too, because people at home are becoming TikTok viral and all of that kind of thing now. I love being independent, exactly the same reasons as Phil was saying: control, monetarily, artistically, and yeah, family and connection to our community. That's why I love it.
That's so inspiring. Stella, you've just joined the family recently. So how have you found being indie and why do you love it?
I think you really get to set your own timeline. I know that, you know, there are recommendations that people give you for, you know, when you need to release things and stuff like that. But really, you've only got yourself and your management team. And within Australia, I just feel like the ball is really in my court, and we will then proceed with, you know, with whatever it is I do once it's done, rather than this kind of uphill battle. And I just, yeah, in a way, it's just kind of being part of a greater family. Independence doesn't mean isolation, although right now maybe, but it really, I do feel like I'm part of the John Butler, Waifs, San Cisco family. We're all in it together and we really look out for each other. You can find more collaboration when you're independent, I feel. You're a lot more free.
Terrific. Marcus, what inspired you to start your own indie label, given you're a lawyer?
Yeah, well, I think the independent thing is that, well, Phil, Caiti and Stella have touched on the key factors of freedom and sort of community. Definitely. I think the flexibility to be able to release and set your own agenda from a creative standpoint and also timeline standpoint. There's not as many mouths to feed and not as much input as there often is the bigger labels. And the community, the indie community itself, very helpful, very welcoming. As you know, this webinar is showing, it's a community that fosters its own and looks out for each other and tries to help and everyone grow and pick everyone up and get everyone going and give them the tools to be able to do it. So it definitely has massive perks in that regard.
Terrific. Mark, running Skinnyfish has seen you have lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities. What are some bits of advice you'd like to give to anyone that's starting their own label or in the midst of a challenge running their own label?
Look, I think the most important piece of advice I can give anyone is to back your own judgment. Is to when you make, but don't be afraid to take a risk. When we started Skinnyfish, if I had have done a business plan for Skinnyfish, an accountant would have thrown me out of the room. I would have said it's ridiculous. Confidence in your vision, and back your own judgment, and be ready for failure, but also accept failure as part of the journey that you learn from. You know, failure is a great learning tool. It's not something, in fact, to be shunned. It's something to be accepted, and as long as it's not continuous failure, you've got some light at the end of the tunnel. So I would just say, back your judgment and follow, judgment.
That is great advice. Phil, what about you? What advice would you give?
I think, following with Mark, I think it's fantastic not to be afraid of, not to be afraid of making a few more full steps. I think when you've got to remember what being independent really means, it's yourself and hopefully some music. And then it's just about getting it out there. It's probably one of the very simple things in the world. So I think, you know, start small, try and create a fan base, get amazing as a live performer, because one day you will have to play live again in front of a live audience. And I think that's really important, is that you're great at your craft. So keep practicing whilst you're stuck in your home and you're not out there gigging, but keep practicing, honing your skills, and try and release the one thing that I've kept at the forefront of our business and for our artists is momentum. So it's, you know, when credit to San Cisco, have been in the business, they're 27 years old, they've been in the business 11 years now. And they're constantly, I don't think anybody would really recall a time when they weren't doing something, they weren't being proactive, they weren't putting out releases. It's kind of the same for John, it's the same for the Waifs. We try and keep the artists moving forward. And it might be creating a merch line, or it might be putting out another song, it might be, I don't know, you know, might be setting up tours in a year's time, but there's lots that you can be doing to be planning for the future and to be kind of constantly being in the face of your audience.
Fabulous. I'd like to talk about resilience, because we're all in the independent sector. We're doing what we love on our own terms. We're setting a vision for what we want to achieve, and we're going for it, and we're trying to make it happen. And every single day when we wake up, we've got problems to solve. We need to be solution focused. And there'll be times where we'll just feel a bit overwhelmed. And we need to tell ourselves that it's okay. And as long as we focus on the end outcome and look after ourselves along the way, it'll be okay. What would you say to that, Caiti and Stella?
Exactly everything that you've just said there. Obviously, COVID's happened, so we're all very aware of grants, but I definitely think prior to all of this, a lot of indie artists that I would meet on the road had no idea that they had the ability to apply for grants, that they didn't have to necessarily do all of the for James and I's career with Sieta, we didn't know about grants for most of that. So I worked a full-time job and didn't really sleep, and then just toured, and until we got good management who were like, actually just go to this website, learn how to do this, get some support letters. I've been very lucky and fortunate to receive 1 or 2 grants here and there. And that helps massively in creating that brain space to create, rather than worrying about how you're going to pay for your flights or your car hire or whatever it is to tour. Obviously things have changed now. So hopefully everyone knows that there once whatever happens after all of this, people are aware that they can receive money if, you know, what they're doing is quality and they put the hard work in, and they can see that there is a market for them. But now I think personally I am seeing the very big benefit in focusing on community, because we can't go anywhere. We're very fortunate here in Darwin that the majority of our businesses have opened up, so we're kind of back to semi-normality, I guess, and just focusing on letting the Northern Territory know who I am, who the rest of our label is, and focusing on that rather than trying to make us, you know, well known around Australia and the rest of the world. If we can, you know, really focus on our community here, I think that definitely will propel us further in the long run when everything does open back up.
Terrific. Well, I think that when everything does open up, all of us will be clamouring to go out and watch you all play. Lynn, get your pencil ready, because I'm sure that when all these, you know, all of that public performance can happen again, there'll be lots of cheques being written at Christmas time. Well, let's hope, huh? Well, we're at the end of our lunchtime session, but I want to thank you all, and you know, I wish you all great things ahead. Keep your focus strong, and I applaud everything that you do, and I'm looking forward to seeing you face to face at the 2020 AIR Awards on the 1st of October. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.